When a single selfless act echoes across lives, it becomes a ripple, a wave of compassion that touches hearts, transforms lives, and reminds us that even the smallest gestures have the power to change the world forever. Join Jesus and his disciples by the lake, as a quiet evening lesson becomes a story of kindness that will reach farther than anyone could imagine. The evening air was thick with the warmth of summer as the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting golden rays that shimmered across the lake. The water lay still, a vast mirror reflecting the soft oranges and purples of the sky. This lake, tucked between gentle hills and surrounded by tall grass swaying in the breeze, was a place of quiet and peace, a place where the world seemed to slow, inviting all who came near to pause and listen. Jesus stood at the edge, his gaze fixed on the water, his posture relaxed yet commanding. The disciples, one by one, gathered around him, their hearts quickening with the anticipation that always accompanied these moments. Peter, the most outspoken of the disciples, sensed something unique in Jesus' silence tonight. He felt an inexplicable tug in his chest, a curiosity that mingled with reverence. He glanced at the others, John, James, Matthew, all of them waiting, eyes fixed on Jesus with a mixture of respect and wonder. The air felt thick with something unspoken, something that filled the space between them like a tangible presence. Unable to contain his curiosity, Peter spoke. "Master," he began softly, his voice barely disturbing the evening's peace, "is there something you wish to teach us tonight?" Jesus turned to him with a gentle smile, one that seemed to hold both the answer to Peter's question and a mystery that went deeper than words. "Yes, Peter," Jesus replied, his voice calm yet filled with a wisdom that drew them all closer. "Tonight I have something to show you." As the disciples watched, Jesus bent down and picked up a small, smooth stone from the shore. Without a word, he tossed it into the lake. They all watched as the stone struck the surface and disappeared, leaving only ripples that spread outward, reaching farther and farther across the water. "What do you see?" Jesus asked, his eyes still on the rippling water, his tone inviting them to look beyond the obvious. John, always thoughtful, responded first. "Master, I see the stone create ripples, each one moving outward, touching places far from where it began." Jesus nodded, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "Yes, John. Each ripple moves beyond where it started, affecting every part of the lake it touches." He looked at each disciple in turn, his eyes warm with encouragement. "This," he continued, "is what I wish to show you." The disciples exchanged glances, each feeling a quiet awe settle over them. They sensed that Jesus was about to reveal something profound, something that went beyond the simple act of a stone hitting water. They leaned in, their minds and hearts open, ready to receive whatever lesson he had for them. Jesus sat down by the water's edge, motioning for the disciples to join him. They settled around him on the soft grass, feeling a closeness, a quiet reverence in the air. The lake stretched before them, vast and calm, as if it too were listening, waiting for the wisdom about to be shared. Jesus' voice, when he began to speak, was gentle yet resonant, carrying a weight that held each of them spellbound. "The lake," he began, gesturing to the water, "is like the world. Every life, every choice, and every action we make creates waves, connecting us in ways we may never fully see or understand. Each of you is like a drop in this vast pond of life. Your lives may seem small, your actions insignificant, but like the stone I tossed into the lake, they carry on, reaching far beyond where they began." The disciples sat in silence, each picturing himself as a drop in this vast body of water, their minds filled with questions. They pondered what it meant for their lives to create ripples, to touch places and people they could not see. James, who often struggled with the need to understand everything with certainty, finally spoke up. "Master, how can we know if our ripples matter? How can we see where they will go?" Jesus looked at James, his gaze filled with patience and understanding. "Not every ripple can be seen, James. Not every wave will be noticed. But that does not make them any less real or any less powerful. As the disciples absorbed these words, Jesus sensed that they needed a story, a picture to fully grasp the depth of his teaching. And so, after a brief pause, he began to share with them a tale, a story about a young man whose life, though small, created ripples he would never know. In a distant village, nestled between rolling hills and fields of wheat, there lived a young farmer named Eli. He was known in his village for his gentle heart and quiet resilience. Each day, Eli rose before the sun, tending to his crops, his hands weathered and strong from years of labor. His life was simple, humble, shaped by his love for the earth and his duty to care for his ailing mother, whom he loved dearly. Eli's heart was heavy with worry most days. His mother's health had been declining, and each day he wondered if he would be able to provide enough to care for her. Still, he found comfort in the familiar rhythms of his life, the smell of freshly turned soil, the warmth of the sun on his back, the satisfaction of a hard day's work. One warm afternoon, after selling his modest harvest at the market, Eli noticed an elderly woman sitting by the roadside, her clothes worn and her hands trembling as she extended them in a silent plea. Her eyes held a sorrow that tugged at Eli's heart. He hesitated, torn between his compassion and his own need. He knew that what little he had was precious, that every coin counted in his fight to provide for his mother. Yet, he felt something stir within him, a quiet whisper urging him to give, even if it meant he would have less for himself. With a gentle sigh, Eli reached into his bag and pulled out his bread and a single coin, offering them to the woman. Her eyes filled with gratitude as she accepted, her hands trembling not only from age but from the depth of her relief. Eli walked away with less in his bag but a peace in his heart, feeling that his small act of kindness, though costly, had given him something intangible, something that could not be measured. In the days that followed, Eli returned to his life, his heart lighter despite his own struggles. Meanwhile, the woman he had helped carried his kindness with her, sharing the little she had with others who were also struggling. She told Eli's story to anyone who would listen, speaking of the young man's compassion as a reminder that even in the darkest times, kindness could still be found. The disciples listened, each feeling the warmth of Eli's compassion ripple through their own hearts. They could sense the ripple spreading, touching lives beyond Eli's knowledge, beyond his understanding. Far from Eli's humble village, in a bustling town where merchants and traders gathered, the air was filled with the sounds of commerce. People haggled over prices, the smell of spices mingled with the scent of fresh bread, and carts rattled along the cobbled streets. Among these busy traders was a man named Simon, a wealthy merchant known for his keen eye and sharp business sense. Simon had not always been wealthy. He had grown up in hardship, much like Eli, and had worked tirelessly to build his fortune. Though time and prosperity had somewhat hardened him, Simon still held a soft spot for tales of kindness and humility. One evening, as Simon rested after a long day of trading, he overheard a story that piqued his interest. A fellow merchant who had recently traveled through Eli's village shared a tale of a young farmer who had given his last piece of bread and a precious coin to an elderly woman. "Such kindness in these difficult times is rare," the merchant said with a shake of his head, his eyes glistening with admiration. The young man had barely enough for himself, yet he gave without hesitation. The story stirred something in Simon's heart. Though he rarely allowed himself to be swayed by sentiment, this story lingered in his thoughts. He felt an inexplicable connection to this young farmer, reminded of his own younger self who had once struggled to make a living. Simon couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to find this young man, to somehow repay the kindness he had shown to a stranger. A few days later, Simon set out on a journey to Eli's village, bringing with him resources and gifts, determined to offer the young man an opportunity that might change his life. Along the way, he felt a strange sense of peace, as though the journey itself was meaningful, a chance to honor the spirit of kindness that Eli embodied. He realized that by helping Eli, he was not only giving back but also reconnecting with the compassionate part of himself he had once cherished. When Simon finally arrived in the village, he sought out Eli, and their meeting was quiet yet profound. Eli, unaccustomed to attention or praise, was humble and grateful. As Simon shared his admiration, Eli felt overwhelmed, realizing that his small act of kindness had reached farther than he had ever imagined. And as they spoke, both men felt the ripples of that one selfless act, carrying them into a future filled with promise and possibility. As Jesus finished sharing Eli's story, a deep silence settled over the disciples. Each of them sat lost in thought, their minds turning over the details, letting the message sink into the depths of their hearts. They felt as though they had been with Eli on his journey, seeing how a single simple act could move across lives and places, transforming both the giver and the receiver. The lesson was powerful, but it stirred questions in each of them, questions that reflected their own doubts and insecurities. John was the first to break the silence, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Master," he began, his brow furrowed, "if each of us is like a drop in this world, how can we know that our actions will create ripples? How can we be sure that our lives will truly matter?" Jesus looked at John with gentle understanding, his eyes filled with the kind of love that reached beyond words. "John, it is not the size of the action that creates the ripple, but the heart behind it. A kind word, a patient ear, a selfless choice. These things, though small, have a power that goes beyond what we can see. You may never know the full effect of your actions, but trust that they carry on." Peter, who often struggled with doubt, looked at Jesus with a hesitant expression. "But Master," he said slowly, "what if we give everything and receive nothing in return? What if we are left empty?" Jesus reached out and placed a hand on Peter's shoulder, his touch a grounding presence. "Kindness is not a transaction, Peter. It is a gift. When you give with an open heart, expecting nothing, you receive something greater than any material reward, the peace and fulfillment that comes from love freely given." The disciples sat quietly, each reflecting on Jesus' words. They felt the weight of their own choices, understanding that even the smallest act could have far-reaching effects. In that moment, they realized that they held the power to shape the world around them, to be ripples in the pond of life. The disciples were deeply moved by the story, but a question lingered in their hearts, one that came from the tension between their human fears and the call to live a life of selflessness. As they pondered, James spoke up, his tone filled with both reverence and concern. "Master, is there not a cost to living like this? Is there not a danger in always giving and always choosing kindness?" Jesus looked at James with understanding, for he knew the struggles each of his disciples faced, the tension between self-preservation and selflessness. "Yes, James," he replied softly, "there is a cost. To love freely, to give without expecting anything in return, requires great courage. You may face hardship. You may feel that your sacrifices go unnoticed. But true kindness is born not from a need for recognition but from a heart filled with compassion." James nodded, his heart both comforted and challenged. He knew that the path Jesus was describing was not easy, that it required a strength he was not sure he possessed. And yet, he felt a quiet determination rising within him, a willingness to try, even if it meant facing his own fears. The other disciples listened intently, feeling the weight of the choice before them. They knew that the path of kindness and love was not without sacrifice, but they also felt a sense of purpose, a calling to be a force of good in a world that so often seemed dark. As the days passed, the disciples found themselves reflecting on Jesus' lesson in every interaction, every choice they made. They began to see opportunities to create ripples of kindness all around them, in the small, everyday moments of life. Whether it was sharing a meal with someone in need, offering a kind word to a stranger, or choosing patience over anger, they felt the power of love guiding their actions. Each disciple found his own way of embodying the lesson. John, who was known for his deep compassion, spent time listening to those who felt lost, offering them comfort and guidance. Matthew, who had once been a tax collector, sought out those who were shunned by society, inviting them into conversations and meals, showing them a love that knew no boundaries. Their actions, though small, began to ripple outward, creating waves of change that touched the lives of countless people. They did not always see the effects of their kindness, but they trusted that each choice was part of something greater, something that went beyond their understanding. One afternoon, as the disciples walked through a crowded street, they noticed a beggar sitting by the roadside. His clothes were tattered, his face weary, and his eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to hold the weight of the world. The disciples paused, each of them remembering Jesus' story of Eli, each feeling the call to act. Peter reached into his bag and offered the man a piece of bread, while John knelt beside him, speaking words of comfort and encouragement. Matthew offered a coin, a gesture of trust and generosity. As the man accepted their kindness, his face softened, his eyes filling with gratitude. He thanked them, his voice trembling, and for a moment, the disciples felt the beauty of the moment, the quiet peace that comes from selfless love. As they walked away, they felt a warmth within them, a feeling that transcended words. They knew that their small acts had created ripples, that their kindness had touched the man's life in ways they might never fully understand. In that moment, they understood the lesson Jesus had shared, that each of them had the power to create change, to be a force of love in the world. As the disciples gathered once more by the lake, Jesus looked at each of them with a love that filled the space around them, making the air feel charged with a sacred energy. He could see the changes in them, the way their hearts had opened, the way they had embraced the call to be ripples in the pond of life. He knew that his words had taken root within them, that they were ready to carry his message into the world. "Each of you is a drop in this vast pond," he said, his voice filled with both strength and gentleness. "Let your lives be filled with compassion, with kindness, with love. Every small act, every choice you make, carries the power to touch the world in ways you may never see. Trust in this power, knowing that your actions, though they may seem small, are part of something far greater." The disciples listened, their hearts swelling with a sense of purpose. They felt the weight of his words, the call to live lives of selflessness, of courage, of love. And as they looked out over the lake, they saw themselves reflected in its waters, each of them a part of something vast and beautiful, each of them a ripple in the pond of eternity. In that quiet moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they understood that they were part of a legacy of love and kindness that would carry on through their actions, through the lives they touched, creating ripples that would carry Jesus' message far beyond their time on earth. They were, each of them, a single drop in the vastness of life, but together they were an ocean of love. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.